Chapter 1. The Crashing Star. The silence of the void was a deceptive thing. It cloaked the urgency of the situation that was unfolding across the stars. X-347, a planet on the edge of known space, was known for nothing more than its arid, inhospitable surface, a wasteland filled with jagged rock formations and the harsh winds that swept across the barren landscape, carrying the dust of a million forgotten ages. No one visited X-347 for leisure, nor for exploration. It was a forgotten world, with no government, no treaties, and no hope of recovery. It was a planet left in the shadow of time, as if the cosmos itself had chosen to abandon it to obscurity. But for all its forgotten nature, X-347 was destined to be the site of an encounter that would alter the course of fate for one human and one alien beauty in a way neither could have ever anticipated. The sun that bathed X-347 in its harsh light was a dying star, its energy slowly leaking into the vast expanse of space, no longer potent enough to sustain life. On this planet, life was something of a cruel joke, a memory of a time long gone, when civilizations had once attempted to call this place home. In the span of countless centuries, all that had remained were echoes, remnants of lost histories, scattered ruins, and forgotten ships that had either crash-landed or been abandoned by their crews. And yet, despite the desolation of the planet, the alien girl, who was in truth no girl at all, had crash-landed here in a manner that seemed almost preordained. In the sky above, a starship, sleek and silver, descended, glinting in the faint light of the dying sun. The ship had once been magnificent, its polished hull reflecting the grandeur of the alien empire it hailed from, a kingdom that ruled vast sectors of the galaxy. But now, as the ship tore through the atmosphere of X-347, it was nothing more than a broken shell, tumbling toward the planet's surface with a violent grace. The ship's hull groaned, buckling under the strain of the uncontrolled descent, and with a deafening crash, it slammed into the rocky surface below, sending plumes of dust and debris into the air like a great storm. The impact rattled the surrounding land, shaking the bones of the planet as though it, too, was in pain. In the midst of the wreckage, amidst the twisted metal and sparks of fire that leapt from the damaged engines, there was a figure lying motionless in alien beauty who had once been the pride of her people. Her skin was a delicate shade of silver, shimmering under the light of the distant sun, her long hair a cascade of flowing violet strands that had once shimmered like liquid starlight. Her features were sharp, regal, a blend of elegance and power that spoke of a lineage unlike any other in the galaxy. She was an alien princess, a noble of the highest order, and yet now she lay at the mercy of fate, her body broken and battered, her life slipping away as the hours passed. The girl, known to her people as Lyra, had been the daughter of the most powerful emperor in the galaxy. A leader known for his cruelty, his ruthlessness, and his unyielding desire to expand his empire beyond the stars, Lyra had been groomed from birth to rule beside him. But she had always been different. Where her father was cold and calculating, she was warm and compassionate. Where he believed in conquest, she had believed in peace. It was a difference that had drawn her into conflict with her father, and ultimately, it was that same conflict that had led to her downfall. In an effort to escape the suffocating grasp of her father's rule, Lyra had stolen away from her home on her own private starship, determined to find a place where she could live without the expectations and demands of her bloodline. She had sought freedom in the stars, but that freedom had come at a cost. Her ship, once the symbol of her rebellion, had been sabotaged by her father's agents, leaving her stranded on X-347, a planet that no one cared about, a place so far from civilization that it might as well have been the edge of the universe itself. It had been a fatal mistake, and now, as she lay unconscious in the wreckage, it seemed that her fate was sealed. It was in the moments of quiet between the storms of chaos that he arrived. Jace Callahan, a mechanic from Earth who had been stranded on this same desolate planet for weeks. He had come to X-347 not out of choice, but necessity. His ship had been badly damaged during an interstellar trade run, and the nearest habitable planet had been X-347. Jace had not been prepared for the isolation of the planet, nor for the uncertainty of what he would find there. He had been alone for far too long, working tirelessly to repair his ship, using only the most rudimentary tools he could scrounge together from the wreckage he found scattered across the planet. He had no intention of being on this forsaken rock any longer than absolutely necessary. He didn't care for the ruins, nor the wild desert winds that howled across the surface. He simply wanted to repair his ship and leave. But fate, it seemed, had other plans for him. As Jace scoured the desert for any usable salvage, his eyes caught something gleaming in the distance, something unnatural. It was the wreckage of the alien ship. His curiosity piqued. He set out toward it, navigating the harsh terrain, his boots kicking up the dust with every step. He knew that the wreckage might hold the key to the parts he needed to get his own ship operational again. But when he arrived at the crash site, it was not the wreckage that captured his attention, it was the body of the girl lying amidst the debris. Lyra was still alive, though barely. Her breath was shallow, her silver skin pale, and her eyes were closed in unconsciousness. Her wounds were severe, her body was bruised, broken, and covered in cuts from the wreckage. She was fading, her life slipping away, and if Jace didn't act fast, she would be gone forever. Something inside him, something human, compelled him to act, to help, even though he knew the risks. He had heard rumors of alien princesses and their importance, their royal status, and the deadly politics that surrounded them, but none of that mattered now. What mattered was that she was alive, and he had the chance to save her. Without hesitation, Jace knelt beside her, his heart pounding as he quickly assessed the damage. His mind raced, drawing on every bit of knowledge he had acquired over the years of working as a mechanic. He had no medical training, but he knew enough to recognize the severity of her injuries. She needed help, and fast. He ripped open his emergency medical kit, applying what little he had to stop the bleeding, to stabilize her. He splinted the broken limbs and fashioned a makeshift stretcher from scraps of metal. Every moment was critical, every second felt like an eternity. He could hear the wind howling around him, the planet's harsh climate reminding him of the stakes, but all he could focus on was getting her to safety. As he lifted her onto the stretcher, the weight of the situation settled on him. This alien, this girl who was so far from home, so far from everything she had ever known, had been cast aside like a broken tool. And here he was, a human, a mechanic with no business in this world, saving her. It was absurd. But despite the absurdity, Jace couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this act of kindness, was somehow destined to be more than just a rescue. It was the beginning of something that neither he nor Lyra could have ever predicted. The journey back to his makeshift camp was slow and arduous, with the wind battering against them at every turn. But through it all, Jace never faltered. As he set up a place to tend to her injuries, a thought gnawed at him, a thought that had little to do with survival and everything to do with the strange, inexplicable bond that seemed to form between them. The more he worked to save her, the more he felt connected to her, a connection that transcended their species, their worlds, their circumstances. And as the alien beauty's silver eyes fluttered open for the first time since the crash, Jace knew that everything had changed. As the alien beauty's eyes flickered open, Jace could see the slow recognition in her gaze, though it was clouded by confusion and pain. Her silver skin shimmered faintly in the light, but it was obvious that she was struggling to stay conscious. Her breathing was labored, shallow, each breath a reminder of how fragile life could be, even for someone so far removed from his own kind. He had only just managed to get her to the shelter of his small camp, which consisted of a series of hastily constructed tarps, scraps of materials from his own ship, and whatever he could scrounge together in his time on this barren world. It wasn't much, but it was enough to protect them from the wind and the dust that whipped relentlessly across the desert. Jace sat beside her, his brow furrowed in concentration as he carefully applied more pressure to her bandages, trying to stem the flow of blood that had been spilling from her wounds. He couldn't help but notice the way her alien features, so sharp and regal, held a kind of ethereal beauty even in the midst of her brokenness. She had been royalty, a leader from a distant empire, someone who was likely accustomed to the finest comforts, the highest luxuries. And yet, here she was, lying in a makeshift shelter on a planet that was nothing more than a forgotten graveyard for ships and civilizations alike. Her life, once so secure and untouched by hardship, had been upended by a cruel twist of fate. Her eyes slowly focused on him, and she whispered something in a language that was foreign to him, her voice weak but tinged with an alien lilt that was both melodic and foreign. Jace leaned closer, trying to understand her, but the words were beyond him. All he could do was gently stroke her arm, offering what little comfort he could. "You're safe," he said softly, his voice hoarse from the dust and dryness of the air. "I'm not going to let you die here, okay? Just hold on." His words were simple, but they were the best he could offer in this moment. She was in no condition to understand the intricacies of his speech, but his tone, his calmness, seemed to reach her. Her breathing slowed a little, and for a fleeting moment, he thought she might drift back into unconsciousness, but then her eyes locked onto his again, and there was a flicker of recognition, a faint hint of understanding. With painstaking effort, she raised her hand, reaching for something invisible in the air, her fingers trembling as though the effort alone might exhaust her. Jace didn't move, only watched her intently, his heart pounding. She needed him, but he had no idea what she was trying to communicate. Was she asking for something? Or perhaps she was simply reacting to the overwhelming sensation of being in a place so far removed from her own kind, from her own world. The moment stretched out, the silence thick and oppressive as Jace waited. He was unsure of what to do next, unsure of how to save her, unsure of how to navigate this strange situation. And then, just as he was about to speak, she whispered a single word. It was a word that he couldn't have possibly known, but the weight of it hung in the air, as if it carried the gravity of 1,000 unspoken things. Marriage. The word struck Jace like a lightning bolt, though he had no idea of its meaning in this context. He blinked, thinking he had misheard her, but her eyes locked with his, and he saw something in them that sent a chill down his spine, a quiet desperation, a plea, perhaps, or something deeper, something far more complicated than he could possibly comprehend. He had saved her life, but had he inadvertently stumbled into something far more intricate, something far beyond what he had imagined? Before he could ask her what she meant, she closed her eyes again, and this time, her breath seemed to steady. It was as though she had given up all effort, all hope, and surrendered herself to the recovery Jace had so carefully begun. His mind raced as he tried to piece together what had just happened. The word marriage lingered in his thoughts, and though he had no context, he couldn't ignore the feeling that the answer to whatever question had been posed was not one he could easily escape from. This wasn't a simple act of saving someone's life. No, this was something else, something far more complicated than he had ever imagined. With Lyra finally asleep, Jace rested his head against the rough surface of the shelter, his mind reeling from the surreal events of the day. His once simple life as a mechanic on a simple planet had become entangled in the mysteries of the galaxy, and now it seemed he was no longer just a man lost on an alien world. He was tied to something far greater, something far more dangerous. What had he just agreed to by saving her? What had he unknowingly entered into? But even as the questions swirled in his mind, one thing was undeniable. He couldn't leave her now. Not when she was so vulnerable, not when he was the only one who could help her. The road ahead, he realized, was going to be anything but simple. Chapter 2. The Ancient Pact. The days that followed were a blur of exhaustion and quiet contemplation. Jace spent every waking moment tending to Lyra, working tirelessly to repair the damage her ship had sustained, trying to fix what little he could salvage from the wreckage. His own ship, which had been grounded on X-347 for far too long, remained in its sorry state, with the parts he needed still beyond his reach. But with Lyra's care demanding so much of his attention, he had little time to focus on his own situation. All he could think of was her. When she finally awoke again, it was to a changed world. She had been unconscious for several days, her body still weak from the injuries she had sustained during the crash. Jace had moved her inside his makeshift shelter, where he'd done his best to keep her comfortable. Her skin had regained some of its natural sheen, and though she still appeared fragile, the light in her eyes seemed brighter than before. She looked at him as though she were seeing him for the first time, as if the chaos of the crash had left her disoriented and confused. Where am I?" Her voice was barely a whisper, fragile yet full of unspoken strength. Her tone had an alien cadence to it, unlike anything Jace had ever heard. Despite the language barrier, he could feel the weight of her words, as though they carried more than just meaning. They carried history, tradition, and something else, something deeper. "You're safe," Jay said again, trying his best to comfort her. "I found you in the wreckage of your ship. I did what I could to help. You're on a planet called X-347. Lyra's eyes flickered with recognition at the name. X-347, she whispered to herself, as though testing the name on her tongue. "This place is nothing but death." Her voice was tinged with bitterness, but there was no judgment in her words, only the resigned understanding of someone who had been betrayed by fate. "You're lucky," Jace said, attempting to lighten the mood. "Most people wouldn't have survived a crash like that. You're a tough one." But Lyra didn't seem comforted by the praise. Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of something darker passing across her features. "You have saved me," she said slowly, as if weighing each word carefully. "But the price is not so simple." Jace's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? What price?" Her eyes fixed on him, and for the first time since waking, she seemed to fully comprehend the gravity of the situation. "You saved my life," she said softly, her voice filled with the weight of an ancient tradition. "And for that, you must pay the price." Jace frowned, confused and unsettled by her words. "What price? What do you mean by that?" Lyra drew in a breath, her alien eyes never leaving his as she spoke. "In my culture, it is customary. The price for saving a life is marriage." She paused, her expression unreadable, as if waiting for Jace's reaction. Jace's world seemed to tilt on its axis, the words hitting him like a physical blow. "Wait, marriage?" he repeated, trying to make sense of the situation. "You're telling me that because I saved your life, I have to marry you?" "Yes," she said simply, her voice calm yet laden with the heavy responsibility of an ancient tradition. "It is the only way." Jace stared at her, his mind spinning, struggling to understand the implications of what she was saying. Could it be possible that he had just unwittingly signed up for something as absurd as this? Marriage to an alien princess, as part of some cosmic contract that neither he nor she had agreed to? The absurdity of the situation was enough to make him laugh, but there was something in Lyra's eyes, deep sincerity, a quiet desperation that stopped him. He was caught in a whirlwind of uncertainty, and there seemed to be no easy way out. Jace stood frozen for a moment, his mind whirling. It seemed absurd, impossible, even that something as trivial as saving a life could be tied to such a profound, ancient custom. The very idea of marriage felt foreign to him, especially with an alien, someone from a completely different world. A princess, no less. He could barely wrap his mind around the concept. He had done what anyone would do, saved a life. It wasn't about some strange cultural exchange or repayment. It was simply survival. And yet, standing before him now was a girl, no, a woman, who seemed to hold the fate of an entire galaxy in her eyes. Her words, though simple, hung in the air like the weight of stars themselves. "You must understand," Lyra continued, her voice barely a whisper. "In my culture, there are no debts left unpaid. A life saved must be repaid in kind, with the binding of two souls." She paused, watching him carefully, reading his confusion. "You may think it is a custom of my people, but it is also a matter of law. To refuse would mean dishonoring both our families. It is not a request, it is a necessity." Jace could hardly believe what he was hearing. "But I'm just a mechanic. I'm nobody in your world. I didn't save you to get married. I saved you because you needed help." His voice rose slightly, frustration creeping in. He hadn't signed up for this. No one could have. This wasn't how things worked in his world. Lyra's expression softened, though her eyes still held that same ancient wisdom, the weight of eons, a knowledge far beyond his understanding. "It is not about who you are in your world, human. It is about who you are in this moment. You saved my life, and that bond cannot be erased. It transcends our differences." She reached out weakly, her fingers trembling, but her gaze steady. "And now, we must honor it." Jace was silent for a long time, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, none of them clear. He could feel the blood rushing in his ears as his pulse quickened. "So what exactly does this marriage mean?" he asked, his voice betraying his confusion and disbelief. "What does it mean for me? For you?" Lyra took a deep breath and sat up, her strength slowly returning. She was still weak, but the fire in her eyes hadn't dulled. "It means that by your people's custom, we are bound. I will become your wife, and in doing so, you will become my protector. The pact will seal our fates and secure our future." Her eyes glinted as she spoke, as though she were explaining something ancient and sacred, something that had been part of her people's culture for longer than he could comprehend. Jace let out a frustrated breath. He had no idea what to say. "And if I refuse?" he asked, more to himself than to her. "You cannot," she replied simply, without hesitation. "To refuse would dishonor both of us and invite retribution. It is not something that can be undone, human." There it was. The finality of it. The crushing inevitability of it all. Jace had saved her, and in doing so, had unknowingly sealed his own fate. He wasn't sure how he felt about it: anger, confusion, maybe even a bit of fear, but one thing was for certain. His life was no longer his own. It was bound to this alien woman, a princess whose people were more powerful and ancient than he could ever imagine. The idea of marriage, with all the customs, politics, and expectations it carried, seemed like an insurmountable mountain to climb. But, as Jace stared into Lyra's eyes, he couldn't help but feel a strange pull. She wasn't just a princess, a stranger from another galaxy. She was a person, someone who had lived through trials he couldn't understand, someone who had seen more than he ever would. She had trusted him with her life, and he couldn't walk away from that. As absurd as it seemed, the seed of something deeper began to take root in his chest, something that didn't feel so foreign. After all, "I didn't ask for this," he said quietly, finally finding his voice again. "But I'll honor it. I'll help you. But understand, this doesn't mean I'll just bow down and do whatever you say. I'm not your servant." His tone was firm, but there was an underlying respect, too. They were bound by this strange custom, yes, but that didn't mean he had to lose himself in the process. Lyra gave him a soft, almost imperceptible smile, and for the first time, he saw the burden lift slightly from her shoulders. "I never asked you to be a servant," she said quietly. "I only asked for your partnership, for us to stand together." She paused, her voice softening. "But you must know that we are now connected in ways that transcend our understanding. There is no turning back from this." Jace nodded slowly, trying to process it all. His mind was still racing with 100 questions, but one thing was becoming clear: they would need to work together. This was more than a cultural misunderstanding. This was survival for both of them. And perhaps, somewhere in the complexities of their bond, there could be something more: a partnership that could transcend the absurdity of their situation. Chapter 3: The Galactic Consequences. The days that followed were a blur of action and contemplation. Jace and Lyra worked together, albeit awkwardly at first, to rebuild what had been broken. Jace, ever the mechanic, did what he could to restore some order to the wreckage of her ship, but he had no illusions about the magnitude of the task. The ship was nearly beyond repair. The damage to the systems was too extensive, and many of the tools he had scavenged from his own ship were too primitive for such advanced technology. But he didn't give up. No, Jace Callahan was not one to back down from a challenge. He would work tirelessly, day after day, because he had no other choice. Not when a woman's life and their bond depended on it. Lyra, for her part, was far from the helpless victim she had been when Jace had first found her. As she regained her strength, she became more involved in the repairs, offering her knowledge of advanced technologies and guiding Jace through the process, even though his understanding of her alien systems was limited at best. Still, he could sense the respect between them growing. They were no longer strangers. They were partners, bound by a strange and ancient pact. And though neither of them said it outright, the tension between them was palpable, unspoken, but undeniable. Yet even as they worked, there was a dark undercurrent to their situation. Jace could feel it in the air, an impending sense of doom. Lyra had told him that her people, the ones she was running from, would come for her. She had betrayed her father, the emperor of her empire, and though he had not yet realized that she was still alive, it was only a matter of time before his agents found her. And when they did, they would not be kind. Her father's empire was vast, stretching across multiple star systems, and it was built on conquest, manipulation, and fear. He had ruled with an iron fist for decades, and anyone who defied him was swiftly dealt with. Lyra had been no exception. The moment she had fled, she had placed herself on the list of the Emperor's most wanted, a traitor to the throne, someone who needed to be brought back dead or alive. Jace could sense the weight of the danger that was closing in on them. No matter how much they worked to repair the ship, no matter how much time they spent in relative peace, the threat of the Emperor's wrath loomed over them like a dark cloud. And it wasn't just Lyra who was in danger. Now, by saving her and agreeing to this strange, binding pact, Jace had unwittingly become a target as well. As the days passed, the distant hum of the planet's atmosphere and the constant rattling of the machinery became a kind of strange comfort to them both. They had settled into a rhythm, with Jace handling the mechanical repairs and Lyra overseeing the finer details. But the thought of what lay ahead the Empire, the Emperor's agents, and the wrath that would soon come was always lurking in the background. Jace couldn't ignore it, couldn't escape it. He was now part of something far bigger than he had ever anticipated, and the consequences of this pact with Lyra, this marriage that neither of them had asked for, were only just beginning to unfold. The days blurred into weeks as Jace and Lyra continued to work together on her damaged ship. The isolation of X-347 had become almost comforting in a strange way, but even so, they both knew that this fragile peace could not last. With each passing day, the weight of the situation pressed down harder on Jace. He had never asked for any of this. A mechanic by trade, he had always preferred the quiet hum of machines to the complexities of intergalactic politics or royal bloodlines. Yet here he was, embroiled in a situation far beyond his understanding, bound by a strange alien tradition to a princess, someone who had once commanded armies and ruled vast swaths of the galaxy. Though the physical repairs to her ship were still far from complete, Jace had managed to rig a few systems back into partial functionality. His knowledge of human technology was useful, but Lyra's expertise in alien machinery was indispensable. They made a formidable team, even if the tension between them remained. Their partnership, born of necessity, had grown into something more over time, a mutual respect that neither could deny. Yet there was still an underlying strain in the air, the unspoken fact that their marriage contract loomed over them like an unmovable force. Every time Jace looked at Lyra, he saw not just the alien princess, but the young woman beneath the crown, someone who had chosen to escape the suffocating expectations of her royal family, someone who had risked everything to find freedom. He couldn't help but feel an undeniable pull toward her, though he knew this bond was not one he had chosen. It was a forced marriage, a contract born of survival, but it wasn't as simple as he had once believed. And then, one day, the first sign of trouble arrived. The stars above X-347, once calm and tranquil, flickered ominously, as if some unseen force was stirring in the depths of the galaxy. Jace and Lyra had just finished another long day of work on the ship when the low hum of an incoming transmission echoed across the camp. It was faint at first, a whisper against the silence of the planet, but as it grew stronger, the unmistakable sound of a warning signal filled the air. Lyra's eyes widened, a deep unease settling over her. She rose quickly, moving toward the communication device that Jace had set up from the wreckage of her ship. "It's them," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "My father's agents have found us." Jace's heart skipped a beat. "What do we do?" "There's nothing we can do. We have to prepare for their arrival," Lyra said, her voice surprisingly calm despite the fear in her eyes. "They will not spare us. You need to hide. I'll hold them off for as long as I can." Jace shook his head, stepping toward her. "I'm not leaving you." Her gaze softened for a moment, but the steely resolve in her eyes returned quickly. "This is my burden to bear, not yours. You've already done more than enough by saving me, by keeping your word. But now, you must protect yourself. If they take you, we are both lost." But Jace wouldn't be swayed. He had already given her his word, and that word meant something. "No, I stay with you. We're in this together." There was a brief silence, the kind that filled the space between two people who understood that there were no more words left to say. Lyra didn't argue further. She knew, deep down, that she wasn't just facing this battle alone anymore. They were partners, bound not by the traditional rules of their respective cultures, but by something more fundamental: trust. The very thing she had sought to escape by leaving her empire had found her once again, and now, it was her choice to decide who she would stand with. The sound of engines in the distance grew louder, and Jace felt the familiar cold twinge of dread course through him. This wasn't just an isolated battle. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Lyra's father wouldn't just let her go. He would come for her with everything he had. And it wasn't just her life on the line, it was his as well. They had crossed a line together, and there was no turning back. Chapter 4. The Final Choice. The roar of engines grew louder, signaling the arrival of Lyra's father's fleet. Jace could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him, the tension in the air so thick it was almost suffocating. He knew that if they didn't act quickly, they would be caught in a trap, and everything they had fought for, their bond, their survival, would be lost. Lyra stood at the edge of the camp, her stance regal even in the face of imminent danger. Her silver skin shimmered in the dying light of the twin suns, her eyes fierce and determined. She looked every bit the princess she was, but she was also something more. She was a woman who had fought for her freedom and would not let it be taken from her so easily. Jace stood beside her, his hand gripping a wrench, his knuckles white with tension. He wasn't a warrior, but he had learned quickly enough that there were some things worth fighting for. And Lyra was one of them. No matter what it took, he would not let her return to the clutches of her father's empire. "We fight," Lyra said simply, her voice unwavering. Jace looked at her, his heart pounding. He had never imagined he would be standing here, preparing to face an empire for the woman he had accidentally married. But here they were, on the brink of something far larger than either of them had anticipated. The first of the enemy ships came into view, a massive, dark vessel that gleamed ominously against the barren backdrop of X-347. It was unmistakable, a symbol of the Emperor's power, of the endless forces he commanded. And with it came a sense of dread, a feeling that no matter how hard they fought, they would be outmatched. But Jace wasn't about to give in. He turned to Lyra, his resolve hardening. "We don't fight them. We escape." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, he saw a flicker of uncertainty in them. But then, her gaze softened, and she nodded. "Escape, then," she said. "But you must trust me." With quick precision, they moved toward the damaged ship, and Jace, using the last of the parts he had managed to scavenge, started the engines. The ship shuddered, groaned, and then roared to life. They were not ready, far from it, but they had no choice. The enemy was upon them, and there was only one way out. The ship lifted off the ground, the heavy metal of its hull creaking and groaning under the strain. Lyra was at his side, guiding him through the unfamiliar systems of her ship, her hands moving quickly, decisively. She knew her ship better than anyone, and despite its damage, it was still their only chance. As the enemy ships closed in, Jace gripped the controls, his fingers trembling. He had never flown anything like this before. But Lyra's calm, steady instructions guided him, and together, they navigated the ship into the skies, leaving the desolate surface of X-347 behind. They broke through the atmosphere, the roar of the engines drowning out the sound of enemy fire that followed them. But as the ship hurtled into the stars, Jace knew one thing for certain: they had escaped. The vastness of space spread out before them, endless and beautiful. But Jace didn't look at the stars. He looked at Lyra, her face bathed in the soft glow of the ship's instruments. She was no longer a princess, no longer bound by the expectations of her empire. She was free. And as their ship sped further from the planet that had almost claimed them both, Jace knew that their bond, however improbable it was, had given them a future that neither had expected. The universe was vast, and the dangers were endless, but together, they would face whatever came next. There was no more talk of marriage as an obligation. There was only trust, partnership, and a bond that had been forged in the fires of uncertainty. And in that moment, Jace Callahan knew that he wasn't just saving Lyra anymore, she was saving him, too.